Confession of Faith, Chapter 6, of the fall of man, of sin, and of the punishment thereof. Section 4. From this original corruption, whereby we are all utterly indisposed, disabled, and made opposite to all good, and wholly inclined to all evil, do proceed all actual transgressions. Question 1. Does this original corruption utterly indispose, disable, and make us opposed to all that is good? Answer: yes. Romans 5 verse 6, Romans 8 verse 7, and Colossians 1 verse 21. Romans 5 verse 6. For when we were yet without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. Romans 8 verse 7. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. Colossians 1 verse 21. And you that were sometime alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, yet now hath he reconciled. Scripture describes that sin not only privatively, that is, lacking original righteousness, and by way of negation, Romans 3 verse 23, Romans 7 verse 18, 1 Corinthians 2 verse 14, and Ephesians 4 verse 18. Romans 3 verse 23, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Romans 7 verse 18, for I know that in me, that is, in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not. 1 Corinthians 2 verse 14, but the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. Ephesians 4 verse 18, having the understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God through the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart. But also positively, and by way of affirmation, when it calls it flesh, concupiscence, the law of the members, indwelling sin, body of death, old man, etc. See John 3 verse 6, Romans 7 verses 18, 20, 23, and 24, as well as Ephesians 4 verse 22. John 3 verse 6, that which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Romans 7 verses 18, 20, 23, and 24. Verse 18, for I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not. Verse 20, now if I do that I would not, it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. And verses 23 and 24, but I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin which is in my members. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? Ephesians 4 verse 22, that ye put off concerning the former conversation the old man, which is corrupt according to the deceitful lusts. Question 2. Does this original corruption wholly incline us to all evil? Answer: yes. Genesis 6 verse 5, Genesis 8 verse 21, and Romans 3 verses 10 through 12. Genesis 6 verse 5, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Genesis 8 verse 21, and the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living as I have done. Romans 3 verses 10 through 12, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understandeth, there is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way, they are altogether become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Men are not only destitute of righteousness, but also full of unrighteousness, incapable of good, but also inclined to evil, turned away from God as the immutable and eternal good, but also turned toward the creature and inclined to every vice. Hence sinners, before grace, are called foolish, disobedient, deceived, serving diverse lusts. Titus 3, verse 3. Titus 3, verse 3. For we ourselves also were sometimes foolish, disobedient, deceiving, serving diverse lusts and pleasures, living in malice and envy, hateful and hating one another. Evil thoughts, murderers, adulteries, false witness. Matthew 15, verse 19. Matthew 15, verse 19. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. Are said to proceed out of the heart, and the flesh is said to lust against the Spirit. Galatians 5, verse 17. Galatians 5, verse 17. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would. Question 3. Do all actual transgressions proceed from this original corruption? Answer: yes. James 1, verses 14 and 15. Ephesians 2, verses 2 and 3. And Matthew 15, verse 19. James 1, verses 14 and 15. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. Ephesians 2, verses 2 and 3. Wherein in time past he walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience, among whom also we all had our conversation in times past in the lusts of our flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature the children of wrath, even as others. Matthew 15, verse 19. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. When we speak of actual sin, we mean aberration from the law of God in internal and external acts, proceeding from original sin as the effect from its cause, a river from the fountain, and the second act from the first. It is called actual, not so much because it exists in act, because this belongs no less to original sin, as because it is in actions and not in habit. With respect to its object, it is against God and against our neighbors. This includes oneself. The former against the first table of the law, the latter against the second. This, however, must be taken materially and not formally, because thus God alone is the proper object of sin. Psalm 51, verse 4. Psalm 51, verse 4. Against thee, thee only have I sinned, and done this evil in thy sight, that thou mightest be justified when thou speakest, and be clear when thou judgest. Question 4. Into what divisions may we place these actual sins? Answer: first, with respect to form, it is divided into sins of commission and sins of omission. James 2, verses 15 and 16. James 2, verses 15 and 16. If a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say unto them, Depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled, notwithstanding ye give them not those things which are needful to the body, what doth it profit? By the latter, the good commanded is omitted. By the former, a forbidden evil is committed. Secondly, some are of themselves sin, others are sin accidentally. The former being when the act is condemned in the law of God, whether positively by commission or negatively by omission. The latter as to mode, when an act otherwise good is performed defectively. Its fault lies either in principle, not from a heart of faith, Hebrews 11, verse 6. Hebrews 11, verse 6. But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. With regard to the end, not done to the glory of God, 1 Corinthians 10, verse 31. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 31. Whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God. Or with regard to mode, lacking in sincerity or honesty, 1 Corinthians 13, verses 2 and 3. 1 Corinthians 13, verses 2 and 3. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, and have not charity, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Thirdly, with respect to principle, there are sins of ignorance, Hebrews 9, verse 7, and 1 Timothy 1, verse 13. Hebrews 9, verse 7. But into the second went the high priest alone once every year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the errors of the people. 1 Timothy 1, verse 13. Who was before a blasphemer and a persecutor and injurious, but I obtained mercy, because I did it ignorantly, in unbelief. And sins of knowledge, Hebrews 10, verse 26, and Luke 12, verse 47. Hebrews 10, verse 26. For if we sin willfully, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins. Luke 12, verse 47. And that servant, which knew his Lord's will, and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. A sin of ignorance denies all knowledge, both theoretical and practical. A sin against knowledge does not deny theoretical knowledge, but has not practical knowledge. Fourthly, sin is either of weakness or of depravity, either wholly voluntary or relatively involuntary. In the Old Testament, sins committed through error and weakness, Romans 15, verse 25. Numbers 15, verse 25. And the priest shall make an atonement for all the congregation of the children of Israel, and it shall be forgiven them, for it is ignorance. And they shall bring their offering, a sacrifice made by fire unto the Lord, and their sin offering before the Lord for their ignorance. Are distinguished from those committed presumptuously, Romans 15, verse 30. Romans 15, verse 30. But the soul that doeth aught presumptuously, whether he be born in the land or a stranger, the same reproacheth the Lord, and that soul shall be cut off from among his people. In the latter, the sinner adds to the evil contumacy and pride, by which he gives full consent to and glories in the rebellion. So errors and secret sins, Psalm 19, verse 13. Psalm 19, verse 13. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then shall I be upright, and I shall be innocent from the great transgression. Are distinguished from presumptuous sins, wherein we find obstinacy and open rebellion. Paul, speaking of himself, says, The evil which I would not, that I do. Romans 7, verse 19. Romans 7, verse 19. For the good that I would, I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do. But elsewhere speaks of those who sin willfully, in Hebrews 10, verse 26. Hebrews 10, verse 26. For if we sin willfully after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins. A sin of weakness and voluntary arises from ignorance, subreption, or any great passion distorting judgment. It is one done without any certain purpose of committing it, which appears daily in the sins of those renewed by the grace of God. A sin of depravity does not arise from ignorance, weakness, or fear, but from wickedness and contumacy, and with the purpose of committing it. It is committed not with resistance and struggling, but with a deliberate and full consent of the mind against the knowledge of the truth. Fifthly, with respect of adjuncts, one is indwelling only. Romans 7, verse 19. Romans 7, verse 19. For the good that I would I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do. Another reigning, John 8, verse 34, and 1 John 3, verse 8. John 8, verse 34. Jesus answered them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. 1 John 3, verse 8. He that committeth sin is of the devil, for the devil sinneth from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. The former the sinner resists, though yielding to it. The latter occurs without struggling. The sinner in every way serves or practices sin.